His fingers brushed mine under the table, and the simple touch sent a warm spark through my arm. I remember the exact moment because it felt like the first real breath I had taken in years. I looked down at our hands for a second, Jake's fingers resting lightly against mine, not grabbing, not demanding, just there, a quiet invitation. When I looked up, he smiled in that calm way he had, like he already knew I was nervous and was giving me space to decide. I didn't pull my hand away. Instead, I turned my palm slightly so our fingers could fit together more naturally. His hand closed gently around mine. Across the table, Ryan noticed and raised his glass with a teasing grin. "Well," he said, "look who's getting brave tonight." 3 months earlier, that tiny moment would have been impossible. 3 months earlier, I was still living in my father's house, still sitting in the front row of a church with 3,000 members, still smiling like the perfect pastor's daughter. My name is Sarah, and for 28 years, my life followed rules that were written long before I was born. No drinking, no dancing, no staying out late, no touching men in ways that might lead to temptation. I grew up believing every rule meant safety and goodness. Or at least I told myself that. The truth was more complicated, because somewhere deep inside, I always felt like I was performing a role instead of living my own life. My father was the senior pastor of a huge church. People admired him. They admired our family too. Every Sunday, someone would say how lucky I was to grow up in such a faithful home. They never saw the quiet pressure behind it. Being the pastor's daughter meant everyone watched everything I did. The way I dressed, the way I spoke, even the way I laughed. I learned early that perfection was expected. I led youth group meetings. I sang on the worship team. I helped organize mission trips. I gave speeches about purity and obedience to girls who were younger than me, and every time I spoke those words, a small voice inside me whispered a question I was too afraid to ask out loud. Is this really what I believe? For years, I ignored that voice, until Jessica called me. Jessica had been my best friend when we were teenagers. 5 years earlier, she left the church, and everyone around me said she had lost her way. My father told me it would be better not to stay in contact with her. So when her name appeared on my phone one evening, I hesitated before answering. But I answered anyway. "Sarah," she said softly, "I heard you've been having a hard time." "I'm fine," I replied automatically. She laughed gently. "You don't have to pretend with me." That sentence alone almost made me cry. She told me about a small support group for people who had grown up in strict churches and were trying to figure out their lives afterward. "You don't have to leave your church," she said. "Just come listen." I went the next week. The meeting was held in a small room at another church across town. There were about 20 people sitting in a circle. Some looked nervous. Some looked relieved just to be there. That's where I met Jake and Ryan. Jake had once been a youth pastor himself. Ryan had grown up in a church very similar to mine. Both of them understood the strange mix of faith, fear, and pressure that shaped our childhoods. When it was my turn to introduce myself, my voice shook. "I'm Sarah," I said. "My dad leads Grace Community Church." A quiet whistle came from Ryan. "That's a big place to question," he said. "I'm not leaving," I replied quickly. "I'm just thinking." Jake nodded like he understood exactly what that meant. "That's where it starts," he said. After the meeting, they invited me to get coffee with them. That first conversation lasted 3 hours. We talked about things I had never dared to say out loud, about expectations, about doubt, about the strange loneliness that comes from being admired but never truly known. For the first time in my life, I felt like someone was listening to the real me. After that night, we kept meeting. Coffee turned into dinners. Dinners turned into movie nights at Jake's apartment. They showed me music that wasn't church music, movies that asked difficult questions, books that explored ideas my church had always warned against. But more than that, they showed me something even more important: choice. One night, we were walking through the city after dinner. The streetlights reflected softly on the pavement after a recent rain. Ryan walked beside me, our shoulders brushing occasionally. Every time it happened, I felt a strange awareness of how close he was. "You know," he said. You're allowed to want things for yourself. I don't even know what I want, I admitted. Jake glanced back at us with a gentle smile. Then maybe it's time to find out. My first real act of rebellion was surprisingly simple. They took me to a bar. It wasn't wild or dangerous like I had imagined. It was just a small place with warm lights, quiet music, and people laughing with friends. Ryan ordered a drink for me that tasted sweet and unfamiliar. How does it feel? He asked. I looked around the room, half expecting lightning to strike. Honestly, I said, it feels normal. Later that night, we danced. At first, I felt awkward and self-conscious. My body had spent years learning to stay still and proper. Jake stood in front of me, guiding my movements gently. Ryan laughed from behind us, occasionally spinning me playfully until I was dizzy with laughter. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't expected. Joy. A few weeks later, Ryan kissed me. We were sitting on the couch during one of our movie nights. The film had ended, but none of us had moved yet. He turned slightly toward me. Can I kiss you? He asked quietly. No one had ever asked me that before. I nodded. The kiss was soft and patient. When he pulled away, I realized my heart was racing. Jake kissed me a few days later. His kiss felt different, steady and warm, like a promise that everything would be okay. For the first time in my life, affection felt natural instead of forbidden. The night I finally left home came suddenly. I had been living two lives, obedient daughter at church and curious explorer with Jake and Ryan. The tension finally became too much. I can't keep pretending, I told them one evening. Then don't, Ryan said simply. Jake offered me his couch until I figured things out. My hands trembled when I sent the message to my father. I told him I was moving out and needed time to figure out my own life. His reply came quickly. He said I was making a terrible mistake. I turned off my phone after that. Jake and Ryan stayed beside me while I cried. Their arms around me felt steady and warm, reminding me I wasn't alone anymore. Later that night, we went out together. We danced again. We laughed louder than I ever had before. At one point, we sat at a table, catching our breath. Ryan's arm rested comfortably around my shoulders. Jake's hand found mine under the table again. Are you okay? Jake asked. I looked at both of them. Yes, I said slowly. I think I finally am. Life changed quickly after that. I found a small apartment. I started a new job outside the church community. I began therapy to sort through the confusion and grief of leaving the life I had always known. My father stopped speaking to me. That still hurts sometimes. But I also discovered something powerful. Freedom. Now, when I sit in that same little bar with Jake and Ryan, I sometimes think about the girl I used to be. The girl who believed her entire life had already been decided. Ryan's arm still drapes easily around my shoulders when we laugh. Jake still reaches for my hand without hesitation. Those small touches remind me of something important. Connection should never feel like a cage. It should feel like warmth, like trust, like the quiet excitement of discovering who you are when no one else is writing the script for you. I spent 28 years performing the role everyone expected. Now, I'm finally learning how to live as myself.